Okay, would you like to introduce yourself, Barbara?
My name is Barb King, and I'm an interpretive ranger with Rocky Mountain National Park.
How did you become a ranger?
I've always spent a lot of time in the backcountry hiking, and I knew the park really well. I had been on search and rescue, and friends had just encouraged me to apply.
And how long have you been a ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park?
Since 1992, and Rocky Mountain National Park is the only park I have worked in.
What are your duties? What does it mean to be an interpretive ranger?
Well, back in the day, we used to be called naturalists, and basically educating, giving the people information so they'll have a better appreciation for the park and we'll have a better respect. And I do that by leading tours or hikes. I do a lot of environmental education with kids and with the schools. Schools either come and visit Rocky or we will go to the classroom.
Are you a teacher the rest of the year? Is this a full-time job for you, or what do you...
No, I'm a seasonal ranger, but I work full-time in the summer and part-time in the winter where I lead the ski and snowshoe tours.
Oh.
So I have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, what is the most fun for you about being a ranger? What are you excited to get up and do?
I think to lead the hikes, but I especially like working with the kids, working with the children. I do several programs in the summer that I've created myself for kids.
What are some of these programs? Do they specialize on animals or what, wildlife?
One is called Come Bugger Ranger, and we explore aquatic insects, and I do that with puppets and different activities, and we end up dipping for bugs in a pond and identifying them. And the other program is Walk Backwards, and this takes place at the Holsworth Historic Site. And I'm not trying to reenact living history, but we do dress up as pioneers, and we pretend to walk back in time and do a lot of the same chores that the early pioneers did. And by the time the kids leave the ranch, they have a better appreciation for how hard the earlier people had to work.
Is there part of your job as a ranger that you don't look forward to? Most jobs have something you don't look forward to.
Yes, mine is doing the evening programs at Timber Creek Campground. I don't like being on stage, and I guess I don't like working nights.
Was there a time when you found yourself in a challenging situation with a person or a group of people? What was that?
Usually around Labor Day. I don't know why. It was back in the late 90s, I believe, when we had that fatality with a 10-year-old boy in the mountain lion attack. And people, pretty insensitive to the situation, wanting to know details. And I was leading a hike up in the tundra, to the tundra, and I had this woman from back east and a man from the Chicago area, and she started asking me details, and of course I didn't want to share that. And the man from Chicago was like, "Don't ask the ranger that. She doesn't want to hear it." Well, long story short, they just started bickering back and forth with each other like kids. And it got into verbal abuse about skiers and snowboarders, and which was better. And they were actually swearing, and I had foreigners along in the hike that asked to leave, and it was like controlling little kids. It was difficult.
What was was the most dangerous weather situation you've ever been involved in Rocky?
I've had a couple. I guess the most dangerous, I hiked or climbed a lot with Rita and Kathleen, who are other rangers, and we were climbing Chief's Head, which is over by Long's Peak, and we weren't familiar with reading upslope conditions and how the clouds come in from the east. And we continued going on, knowing the clouds were coming, and we got socked in fog. We made the summit. We didn't see anything, but coming down, we totally lost our sense of direction. The fog didn't lift. I got out my compass to take a reading, but we were close to an iron dike, so with the iron dikes, the needle of a compass just spins around and you can't get a reading. We were crawling on the tundra trying to see if there was any window to get any visibility, and there wasn't. And we spent hours up there. We had to sit down and evaluate how much food we had, thinking we'd be there overnight. It was pouring down rain. Finally, I got where the compass would take a reading, and it seemed totally wrong and unfamiliar, but we just knew from training, just follow what it says. And we did that, and finally we got down to a trail. We didn't know what trail, but we got down to a trail and were able to get out.
About how long, what period of time did it take? When you got back, how late was it?
It was probably 8:39 at night when we got to the parking lot, so it was a good 12-hour time period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We got down on our knees and kissed the trail when we found it.
Do you have a favorite place in the park?
Yes.
Do you tell people about it, or
No.
is it a secret? Can you describe what's so wonderful about this place without telling us exactly
I could
where
probably
it is?
tell you, because it's not very many people get to it. It's in Hayden Gorge, and from Trail Ridge Road, you can look over to it. It's the drainage next to the gorge lakes, where the lakes kind of like step up. It's just extremely remote. You either have to drop down into Forest Canyon and then climb back up to it, or you have to start like from Milner Pass and climb Ida, and yeah. Chialee and Cracktop, and we dropped down that way. But it's paradise. The wildflowers are just spectacular, magical, all kinds of little waterfalls, a very long vertical waterfall going into Hayden Lake, which is kind of unusual to see waterfalls like that in Rocky.
Now, is there a trail to there, or did
No.
you go?
No.
How did you just discover it by accident, or had someone told you about it?
No, we just look at maps. Since I've worked at the park since '92, and I've lived here pushing 47 years, you get a little tired of the trails. So we just kind of study the maps and look for areas that look interesting, so that's how we found it.
Do you have a favorite animal in the park?
I don't think so. Maybe beaver. Beavers I like.
Why do you like beavers?
Because they're a really important species of animal. They're considered a keystone species, and they can change a meadow into a pond almost overnight. They provide important habitat for so many of the other animals. So I'd say most of the animals really depend on the beavers.
Now, the term keystone species, that's new to me. What does that mean, and what are a couple of other examples of a keystone species?
Let me think. Don't ask me that.
Okay, all right, that's all right. We got enough on the beavers. Okay. Do you have a favorite experience in the wilderness?
Anytime I'm out, I think, but I did meet my husband here in the park. He's a retired wildlife biologist, but I think when we used to go radio tracking the bighorn sheep, that was pretty exciting. Saw beautiful areas, had opportunities to climb lots of mountains trying to get radio signals on the animals.
So, in other words, they have something on them that you're honing in
Yeah, they'll
on.
have a collar, and we go out with an antenna radio telemetry, and each collar gives out a certain signal so you can identify the individual animals. We were trying to find their migration patterns, where they spend the summer times, where they go for lambing, and where they go in the wintertime.
How has your job changed over the years that you've been a ranger? Or how has the job of ranger changed?
It's changed a lot. It's become much more, can I say, bureaucratic. Lot of focus, safety. It seems like every time you turn around there's a new regulation. Since Jeff Christensen's death, he was a backcountry ranger. We have to file out backcountry plans and specify where we're going, what time we're leaving, what time we'll be back, what color is our backpack, just a lot of restrictions. They were unable to find Jeff for 8 days, and that's because he didn't have any official plan documented. Also, since 9/11, I've seen a lot of changes. The Visitor Protection Department and the Interpretive Division, we have really seemed to become more separate divisions, where back in the 90s we were just kind of all one. Seemed like all more one park.
What are some of the special memories that stay with you over all these years that you've been a ranger?
I think because I like working with the kids so much, it's the kids. I have families come back from when I first started off to see me. In fact, just left a ranger about 23 summers ago, and they come every year, every fall, and stop in to see me. But their daughter had just been married, she's now 30, and they were showing me wedding pictures. So I guess, I've made a lot of good friends through the years, and just, having the kids grow old with Ranger Barb,
If I was planning a trip to Rocky for my family, what would you recommend that we do? Where should we go?
The Rocky Mountain National Park was set aside for the alpine tundra, and as long as the weather was good, didn't look like any storms were approaching, I would focus on the alpine tundra. There's 11 miles of Trail Ridge Road that is above tree line, and you reach an elevation of 12,183 feet. There's some short hikes you can take. There's interpretive trails with signs explaining life on the tundra. You'll have wonderful views of all the mountains. You'll experience the life of cold, a world of cold, and an ecosystem that is all located below your ankles. So it's really fascinating. And the Alpine Visitor Center too has wonderful exhibits, again explaining life on the tundra.
Have you been in other parks besides Rocky? How would you compare Rocky to some of the other national parks? What's distinct about Rocky other than this?
I'd
that you
say
just
the
said?
alpine tundra, the high elevation mountains, I think, the snow that usually stays in the mountains all year long. I grew up going to national parks. My dad would take us to national parks every summer. The Tetons were always his favorite just because of the beauty of the mountains and the fishing. We'd go to Yellowstone, but it was always on a rainy day in the Tetons when he'd take us to Yellowstone. So I never saw Yellowstone on a nice day until about 10 years ago when I went there as an adult. And I actually called him from one of the lodges and said, you know, Dad, I woke up to 18 inches of snow this morning in my tent. I still haven't seen Yellowstone on a nice day. But they're all unique in their own way. I'd say Mount Rainier is my favorite national park. I think the mountain to me is just so humbling. So I enjoy the hiking there.
Is there anything else we didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about?
I think you covered. Yeah, good questions.
Have you ever walked down the Ute Trail, gone over the top and down? Like experienced it like maybe the Utes have done?
Yes, I've done the entire Ute Trail, even over to the Estes Park side. And it's interesting, once you get familiar with what things should look like naturally on the tundra, you can still pick out like old game drives, or sometimes you can find evidence of their old hearts that they had used. Down in Forest Canyon, I remember finding old campfire rings located on top of glacial erratics, and you could tell they were old from the lichens on the rock, and the old charred wood had lichens on it too. And apparently the Native Americans, it was not uncommon for them to have their campfires on top of these rocks to help prevent forest fires.
That sounds neat.
It was neat, but it...
Is there any animal you don't particularly like?
I'm getting where I don't like the moose. I think the moose are the most dangerous animal in the park. Everybody seems concerned about mountain lions or bears, but you're more likely to be injured by a moose. And I don't like them because they don't belong here. They were introduced by the Colorado Division of Wildlife and the U.S. Forest Service back in the late 70s on the other side of our Never Summer Mountains. And at the time they contacted the park superintendent and asked if he had any objections to the introduction. He said no. And then in about 5 years we saw the first moose. And that was pretty exciting, you know, because it's an animal you didn't see. But then there's more moose and more moose, and moose with having twin calves and moose having triplets. And they're just having a really big impact on the Kawanichi Valley. The willows are all dead. The elk have taken a lot of the rap for that, but the park really needs to take a look at the moose situation because we're seeing songbird populations decline. We don't have the beavers in the valley today that we should have, and we just have too many moose. It's park policy if an animal isn't native to the park and if it comes within our boundaries it's going to be removed. For example, like the mountain goats. Mountain goats compete with the bighorn sheep for forage, plus they carry a disease called Johne's disease. It's a digestive disorder, and it's always fatal, and it's easily transmitted to the sheep. So goats will be removed immediately. And I just asked one of the biologists from resource management a couple nights ago, why have we allowed the moose to stay? So we're at the very southern range of moose habitat, and apparently every once in a blue moon a bull moose might wander through the region of Rocky Mountain National Park, but we never had moose like we had them today.
Talk a little bit about safety precautions around moose and around bears and mountain lions. How should people react when they see these animals?
Calmly. Well, obviously it's always best to view them from a distance. Mountain lions, I've hiked and climbed in this park for at least 50 years. I've seen one mountain lion, and it was so brief. Black bears, if they're not getting into trash or getting food easily, they're naturally shy, and they'll see us before we see them, and they'll head in the other direction. The moose, the visitor has to be careful, especially in May and June when the cows are calving. The moms are very defensive, just like any mom would be if they're babies. And if they do see a cow with a calf, they need to give it its distance, back away if necessary. If a moose does charge, they need to get something in between themselves and the moose, whether it's a tree or a picnic table or a car or another visitor. You got that? But especially dogs are, because moose don't know the difference between dogs and wolves were their primary predator. So they hear a dog barking or see a dog, they're automatically going to be on the defense. In September, when the moose rut is starting, it's the bulls whose hormones are raging, and they become more unpredictable this time of year. So